Dr. Jerud, welcome to Alive and Well. So grateful to have you with us today. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Okay, so I'm so excited. You guys know I love talking about emotions, regulating our emotions, what that actually means, teaching our kids to do the same. And I have your book here, Emotion Savvy Parenting. You guys can't see it if you're listening to the podcast, but I'm going to link it for you. And I'm so excited to talk about it. I would love to hear a little bit about how you got into this work particularly, and even like how the book came about. I know you're also a mom, but tell us a little bit of the backstory before we jump in.
Yeah, sure. Well, how I got into this work. I mean, I think like most therapists, I wanted to help other people.
Yeah.
And so I initially I was really focused on treating anxiety related disorders. And in graduate school, I had the opportunity to do a 2-year, what we call a practicum, where I worked with Dr. Marsha Linehan, who really kind of paved the way for treatment for individuals who struggle with emotion dysregulation. She came up with this treatment called dialectical behavior therapy, or
Yeah.
DBT. And so I, was really well trained in treatments for anxiety related disorders and emotion regulation difficulties. And in my own life, though, at times, right, finding that I was struggling to use the tools that I had learned in my training,
Yeah.
especially in my parenting as a mom. And so I really, at that point in time was doing some deep dives, trying to think about like, well, how could I better help my kid, myself at the time? And really stumbled upon something called respectful parenting,
Mm-hmm.
which I really like. It really resonated with me in so many ways. And at the same time, I'm a clinical psychologist. I always look for the data. There's not a lot of data or research to support respectful parenting. But what I came to
Mm.
realize as I was trying to integrate ideas from respectful parenting into my own parenting is that there's this, like, it really overlaps very well. It really aligns beautifully with the evidence-based treatments that I provide in my clinical work that I was
Mm.
trained to be able to provide. And so that's really where like it all kind of started. I realized like I could almost like kind of merge these ideas, these strategies and ways of being together
Yeah.
to offer an approach for myself that I could follow as well as for other parents. And so just to kind of wrap up to your question in terms of how did the book come to be? Well, really like I was seeing other parents in my practice who were struggling, my friends, family members who were struggling to regulate their own emotions when
Yeah.
with their kids. And I wanted to help people. And one day I happened to be talking with my husband about it. He was like, you should write a book. And I was like, I'm going to write a book. And that's how it happened.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is so good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what I want to kind of highlight is, guys, I'm actually going to put this as a question because I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're doing this as a professional, right? Teaching other people. You've studied this in depth, and then you're putting into practice in real life, having your own child. And you're noticing that sometimes things will come up where you're struggling to put into practice the things that you know. And I think that's such a common feeling for moms. There's so many things that we know, or we've read the books about, or we've listened to the podcasts on.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, right, like something happens in our home and we're getting frustrated, or we don't feel heard, or we're triggered. And it's like, ah, it all comes out. We're like, I should know better. Like I know, like I knew what to do, but I couldn't actually do it. And before we kind of get into like the practice and maybe some thoughts that you have for them, I would love to just hear how you even like your own mindset around that. Like when you noticed that frustration, what was the self-talk? What was going on? Because I mean, you turned around and wrote a book about it, which is so awesome. But I know there's a lot of moms that or dads too that can be really hard on themselves when they're like, man, I should know better, whatever that voice sounds like.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to throw out there that there's a big gap between knowing and doing, right? Or knowing and doing better, we could say. And so, we can know all the tools that are out there, and yet sometimes that knowledge just goes out the window, especially when emotions are running high. And so I think just first of all,
Normal.
yeah. And I want to say, like, I wasn't always able to do this, but the more we can give ourselves that compassion, that grace to mess up, recognize that we're human and we're going to make mistakes again and again, the better. Because if we're beating ourselves up, we don't feel good about ourselves then. And rarely do we do better when we're feeling badly about ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So being kind to ourselves is key. I think for me, one of the things that was getting in my way a lot was this idea that, so I had these tools, but I was also operating under the assumption that like it was my job to kind of change my kids, their
Mm.
behavior. And really like when I struggled most was kind of, right after my son was born. So my second child was born and my daughter understandably had all these feelings about that,
Yeah.
about having his new brother in her life. But like, I felt like rather than, I was really focused on trying to change the way she was dealing with that, right? As opposed to just letting those feelings be there. And when I was able, and it took a while, but when I was able to kind of like let go of that and see that like, oh, I don't have full control over her or later her brother. The
Yeah.
only person I really can control is myself.
Mm.
That's when the tools that I had learned became so much more effective for me, because it was like, oh yeah, I don't have to change any of that. I just have to focus on my own stuff here.
That's so good. Wow, such a different perspective, and it's so true, right? I think we all have that urge to try to like change things about our kids or have them be a certain way. It's like that's just not reality. We don't have a lot of control over them. The title of the book, this is like a perfect segue, is Emotion Savvy Parenting. So before I want to like talk to you about some of the frameworks that I think would be really helpful. But before we do that, just like emotion savvy parenting, what does that mean, or what do you mean by
Mm.
that when you say it?
Oh, I love that question. Really, when I think about somebody who's emotionally savvy, I think about somebody who is able to feel the full range of emotions, right? The ones that
Mm.
we think of as being pleasant emotions, as well as those harder, more challenging, maybe even unpleasant emotions. Be
Yes.
able to feel those feelings, but not have to cede control to those feelings, right?
Mm, yeah.
That, so especially with those uncomfortable feelings, oftentimes what happens, we're evolutionarily wired to want to avoid emotional pain of any
Yeah.
kind. And so oftentimes we do that by like giving into the urges that come with those feelings that often maybe help us feel better in the moment. Maybe it helps us to escape that discomfort. So if
Yeah.
I'm really angry, I yell, and that might help like release some of that anger. Maybe it even gets the thing that I'm angry with to kind of change. Maybe that's my kid, right?
Wow.
But it doesn't actually um, then it's like the emotions have taken control. And so when I think about
Yeah.
emotion savvy parenting, it's about learning can feel those feelings, however intensely they may be there,
Yeah.
and still show up in a way that's consistent with how I want to show up for my kids.
Yeah, I think it's just so encouraging to hear, I think, because we are wired to experience all these different kinds of emotions. The ones, like you said, are more pleasant to experience, and then
Mm-hmm.
those that can be a little more uncomfortable. And I think so many of us, for so many reasons over time, have gotten really good at suppressing or repressing a lot of the uncomfortable ones. And part of that I think is because they're scary. Like one, I think no one wants to feel uncomfortable, but two, it's like how do I do this in a way that's not scary to my kids or
Right.
harmful or anything like that. Okay, so you teach this art framework:
Mm-hmm.
accept, regulate, and tolerate. Can you give us just like big picture zooming out on the framework, and then maybe we could
Mm-hmm.
go through each of those three, because I think this is
Yeah.
going to be really helpful. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So really the art framework, I think of it as being made up of these being made up of tools that we can use to help us better accept, regulate, and tolerate our emotions. And those tools are tools that I selected and adapted from what we call dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT skills training. So I
Okay.
mentioned that earlier, DBT. But so these are really ways of relating more skillfully to our emotions. And so each of those letters stands for a different thing, right? So
Yeah.
accept is about accepting those feelings, but not just the feelings or emotions, also other things that we don't really have all that much control over. The
Mhm.
idea is that in general, when we tend to, oftentimes when things happen in our lives that we don't really like, we want to kind of try to reject that or change that in some way.
Mhm.
And yet rejecting reality oftentimes kind of prolongs and exacerbates our suffering. And so
Yes.
the idea here is that we don't have to like or approve of something, but
Mhm.
if we can accept it without judgment, it can
Yes.
be really freeing, really empowering, especially for us as parents.
Yes. And when you're
Yeah.
talking about accepting, this is so good, you guys. Our own emotions. Talk to me also about accepting the emotions of our partners and our children and
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
well, first I'll say it's easier said than done for
Yeah.
sure. But the thing is, like, all feelings are valid. They're there because, right, we are all programmed to have these feelings. They serve an evolutionary purpose. So just to note, right, they're there because they help convey important messages to us and others.
Yeah.
They also help motivate us to take effective and necessary action. So
Yeah.
they're there for a reason. And so when our kids are feeling emotions, no matter how messy, excessive, or unreasonable they may seem, or our partners are, there's a reason for that feeling. That feeling is valid, even if we might feel something different in a very similar situation. And we can talk
Yeah.
about more about that. But the more we can let that feeling be there, as opposed to try to fix that feeling or
Mhm.
judge that feeling,
Yeah.
the more likely it is that that feeling is probably going to have a chance to run its course for
Yeah.
that person. And the better we're going to feel about that person, our relationship with them, and the better that person's going to feel about us, right? Because it doesn't feel good if you're feeling a really strong emotion and I'm telling you, like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or I'm judging you for feeling that way. It's not going to feel good for you. It's
Oh,
also not going to feel good for me, too.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So practically speaking, when we talk about accepting our
Mm.
emotions, is this like, how do you teach this or how would I go about practicing this if this is something I wanted to focus on? Is it just
Yeah.
a matter of like changing how I think about my emotions or are there certain things that I can do that might be helpful?
Yeah, some of it is a lens shift, right? Recognizing, I think of sometimes even those moments of distress, whatever that emotion is, as being golden opportunities to
Mhm.
practice relating more skillfully to those challenging emotions. So rather than seeing discomfort, whether it's anger, anxiety, frustration, sadness as a bad thing,
Mhm.
no, right? Like, how wonderful. In some way, it's like a gift from the universe. You get this chance to practice relating differently, more skillfully to that emotion. So I
Yeah.
think that's one piece of it. The other piece that I talk about in my book is a skill of mindfulness that can
Mhm.
help us be more accepting. So
Yeah.
mindfulness is really the act of paying attention on purpose to the present moment as experienced through any one of your five senses. And
Mm.
so that could be just being mindful without judgment. So that I don't know if I said that, without judgment is part of mindfulness.
Yeah.
But like mindfully noticing the feelings you're having without judging those and recognizing that mindfulness in general, it is sometimes described as the act of losing focus 1,000 times and then bringing your focus
Mm.
back 1,001 times. So recognizing that those judgmental thoughts, distracting thoughts may come up from time to time when you're, for instance, trying to be mindful of a given emotion.
Yeah.
And you can notice that, yeah, like I'm starting to judge the fact that I'm feeling angry. Let me
Yeah.
just come back to noticing the fact that I'm feeling angry. So I will say, just before, one more thing there is that trying to be mindful of a strong unwanted emotion is one of the hardest ways to practice mindfulness. And so that's why I recommend, before just jumping to trying to be mindful of those challenging emotions, I
Yeah.
recommend first trying to be mindful at other times, right? When
Yeah.
you're drinking your morning sip of coffee,
Okay.
when you're going for a walk, when you're playing with your kids on the floor or bathing them at bedtime,
Yeah.
right? So carving out time to practice, and it can just be for 5 seconds or 30 seconds or 5 minutes. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be for an extended period of time. But the more we can practice, kind of building that muscle for
Yeah.
tuning into the present, the more likely we're going to be able to do that when those painful emotions are there.
Oh, that's so good. Can you talk a little bit as it relates to this to why judgment makes it so difficult? Like why judging our emotions makes it so difficult? Like what does that
Yeah.
actually do in our brains? Because that's something for me, like once I learned, when I judge the emotion versus when I greet it with compassion, how
Yep.
that actually opens up
Yeah.
the opportunity for me not only to feel, but like to actually feel it, not just think about it and run the story and whatever, right?
Right.
And then allow
Yeah.
it to release. And then for me to have that feeling of like, relief,
Yeah.
which is it's almost impossible, I think, to grow and change from a place of judgment. But
Yep.
I'm not. I know I have nothing clinical to back that up with that my
No, I think
experience.
you're
But I would
spot
love to hear
on.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, that judgment, typically, when we're judging an emotion, I shouldn't be feeling this way. We
yeah,
are essentially shoulding all over ourselves, right?
yeah,
And in a way that like leaves us feeling badly about ourselves. It's probably going to give way to even more unwanted emotions, right? So now maybe not, I'm not only feeling angry, but I'm maybe also feeling ashamed of the fact that I'm angry.
Right.
And that just like that heightens everything. And then it's going to be even harder to figure out how to go ahead and feel that emotion
Yeah.
and move through that emotion. And so I think the more we can just accept that, let that feeling be there, and even like acknowledge for ourselves, of course I'm feeling this way,
Yeah.
right? Like this is it, and maybe it's, of course I'm feeling this way, even though I realize not everybody would, but given my circumstances, given what my day was like even before all this, given the way I'm thinking about things, makes
Yeah.
perfect sense that I'd be feeling exactly how I'm feeling. And just giving ourselves permission to feel in that way can
Mm-hmm.
be so freeing. And again, really in general, no emotion can last forever unless we do something that's going to fuel it. And oftentimes when we're judging the emotion, that leads to attempts to try to suppress or
Yeah.
push away that emotion. But what we know, we've got a lot of data to suggest that the more we try to push away an emotion or avoid it, suppress it, the more likely it is that that emotion is going to keep coming up. So that's the other piece, right? The judgment is likely going to give way to behaviors that are actually in the long run just going to prolong our distress.
Yeah. It's that idea of like what we resist persists,
Yes,
right?
yes. I
Yeah.
love that quote.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right. So that's accepting our
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Yep.
And then the next one, the R, is
Yep.
regulating.
Regulate.
Um, I'm really excited to talk about this. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give you the floor and just teach us what that
Mm-hmm.
means, and then we can talk about how we go about doing it. Because I think a lot of times when we think of, or at least when I get asked about regulating our emotions and emotional
Mm-hmm.
regulation, a lot of times what people expect is that they actually don't want to feel though. They're like, how can I not feel
Yeah.
the uncomfortable?
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, let's talk about it. That's actually
Yes.
not what it means to be regulated in our emotions. So I
Right.
love your take. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I agree with you 100% there, right? Again, coming back to that idea that all feelings are valid, that we are wired to have those feelings. We can't get rid of them altogether, and nor would we want to, right? If I didn't feel anxious when crossing the street with my kids, I wouldn't look both ways. I wouldn't like ask them to hold my hand, right? I would just let them go. I would just go. It'd be
Yeah.
really dangerous. So those emotions are there for a reason. So, really, regulating emotions is all about understanding our emotions in the first place, like, and the
Okay.
fact that they are actually much more complex than many of us
Mm.
realize.
Oh,
Because understanding that complexity then allows us to reduce our vulnerability to experiencing painful, unwanted emotions in the first place,
okay.
and to change those feelings when they do arise and aren't serving us well. So
Okay.
that's what regulating involves, understanding those feelings so we can make it less likely we're going to feel them. When
Yeah.
they do show up and aren't helpful, change those emotions in some way.
Okay. Can we talk about both of those?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course.
So
Yeah.
let's start with the first one. So understanding it, understanding those
Mm-hmm.
emotions so that we're
Yep.
not as, how did you phrase it, as vulnerable when they come up the next
Yes.
time? Okay.
Yep. Yep. So with the understanding piece, and like I mentioned, that they're complex, those
Yeah.
emotions. So what I will say is we oftentimes think, an emotion, something happens and boom, all of a sudden I'm feeling this really intense emotion. And all we notice is like the emotion itself.
Yeah.
But it turns out that there are actually many different ingredients or components to that emotion.
Mm.
And so I like to think of emotions as being similar to a batch of cookies, right?
Okay.
Like if let's imagine a batch of chocolate chip cookies. Those cookies look delicious, they smell delicious, they taste delicious, but you really only see the finished product, like the
Yeah.
cookie itself with the chips. You don't see all of the ingredients that go into that cookie. If you think about it, like a batch of cookies is usually made up of a bowl of wet ingredients and a bowl of dry ingredients. You
Yeah.
mix them together, and what do you know? Then you have cookie dough that you turn into a cookie. And the same is true of our emotions, right?
Okay.
I like to think of them as being made up of what I call primary ingredients and secondary ingredients.
Okay.
And so and the reason why that can be really helpful to note is so there are a number of primary ingredients and a number of secondary ingredients. And just knowing those can offer many different points for intervention. So I can
Mm.
target one or more of the primary ingredients to prevent an emotion from firing in the first place.
Wow.
Or I can target one or more of the secondary ingredients to maybe help me better tolerate that emotion when it does show up.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of those, just briefly, I'll note the primary ingredients. Those are first, in order for an emotion to fire, some sort of prompting event has to occur.
Okay.
Right. So maybe your kids do something, they make a mess, they start fighting. Maybe it's even an internal experience. You've got a headache, right? That like just won't go away. Or you're thinking about a fight you had earlier with your partner,
Yeah.
but there's some sort of a prompting event. Then usually we make some sort of an interpretation about that event, or we have thoughts about that, right? Like, oh, how could my kids do that? They know like I'm trying to clean the house or something like that. Right. We have some sort of interpretation. And then there are vulnerability factors that make us more likely to have those unhelpful thoughts or interpretations that are going to give way to an emotion that probably isn't going to feel all that great. And so those could be things that we experienced recently, like earlier in the morning, maybe, I don't know, you spilled something on your outfit for the day, and so now you're running late for work, or maybe you did get into an argument with a loved one. Maybe you even saw something in the news that was upsetting, but something happened earlier in the day that's rendering you more vulnerable to those negative thoughts and interpretations. So those are the primary ingredients. I won't even yet go into the secondary ingredients, but what I will just say with the regulating skills, those are skills to help change the primary ingredient. So I can change the prompting event. I can reframe those unhelpful thoughts that I might be having about the prompting event, or I can target those vulnerability factors to make me less vulnerable to having those negative thoughts and interpretations that are going to give rise to the unwanted emotions.
So kind of just growing an awareness of what's causing, like what's the first domino kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And then being like, okay, how can I be intentional about getting ahead of it, or noticing when the trends, or right when it's happening?
Yep. And maybe the emotion has already fired. Maybe you're already feeling angry. And so, but even then we can still think about, oh yeah, like maybe I'm angry right now because I haven't had a chance to eat. I should probably go grab my lunch, right? Or maybe I'm feeling angry because I'm thinking like my kids, again, should know better. And I remind myself, no, like, however you reframe that thought, sometimes reframing that thought in some way, they do usually know better, but clearly they are struggling right now and aren't able to, do what I would ideally want them to do. Reframing the thought then can also help. So it can help both on the like preventing the emotion from firing in the first place, but it can also help in terms of changing that emotion when it is there.
Okay. And is that second part, the shifting of the emotion or the state?
The changing of the emotion.
Changing.
Yes. But that is all falling under the regulate side of things, right?
Yes.
So those,
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that's the regulating part. Anything else with regulating that I'm missing here that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I could go more into it, like the different skills for changing a prompting event, problem solving, or
how about like an
skills for
example or something? Yeah, that might really, maybe something that you find that's really helpful for parents.
Oh, well, I think it really depends on the parent and the situation, right? Like but let's say there's something that is reliably making life hard for you, right? So
Maybe it's like mornings and getting your kids to school.
Yes. Oh, yes. Mornings and getting your kids to school on time. That is something I used to struggle with big time. So for instance, right, maybe it's problem solving. Okay. So maybe your kids are having a hard time getting dressed in the mornings. Well, my kids sleep in their clothes for the next day. They don't sleep in PJs. And that just makes it a little easier to get out the door, right? Maybe it's that, getting shoes on is hard.
Yeah.
Can you put the shoes on in the car? Do they have to be put on before they get to the car, right? Little things like that. Could we sometimes, if need be, bring breakfast on the go as opposed to eating it here? So those are like problem solving, maybe the event itself, making it, giving you a little more time, or like having fewer things to do in that amount of time.
Yeah.
But let's say that it's, siblings fighting in the morning. That's really kind of giving you a hard time. Well, it might be either kind of you trying to preempt that, right? Maybe it's like you just like actually carving out time to be able to sit next to them at breakfast so that like they can't be fighting as easily, right? Like your punches can't be thrown when you're in the middle. You can block those. Or maybe it's, thinking too, if the noise gets really loud for you in the mornings, maybe you put in some earplugs to reduce the noise, or you have some calming music on in the background for everybody to listen to, right? So lots of different things. I think it's about figuring out what in the morning is causing the issue. And then you can either problem solve on your own, you can problem solve with your kids, but trying to change things there can be really helpful.
That's so helpful. Okay. So we have accept, we have regulate, and then the T is Tolerate.
Tolerate.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And so that is tolerate is what I call distress tolerance. So in
Mm,
DBT, we say distress tolerance skills. And these are skills, I like to think of them as skills for changing those secondary ingredients,
okay.
right? So the secondary ingredients, we didn't really talk about them, but there are a number of them. So when an emotion has fired, there are going to be a number of things that kind of happen simultaneously in our bodies, in our minds, in our behaviors that we don't even always realize. So
Yeah.
there are these biological changes that happen in our body, physical sensations that we have in our body. So for
Yeah.
instance, when I'm angry, maybe my heart's racing, I get hot, my muscles tense up, right?
Yes.
There are action urges. Maybe in that moment, I have an urge to yell,
Yeah.
to, shout, to whatever it is that I have an urge to do. With
Yeah.
anxiety, the urge is often to avoid altogether.
Yeah.
Then there are usually some changes in my expressions. So my
Mhm.
body language, for instance. So maybe I tense up my body, I cross my arms, I furrow my eyebrows, right? I do different things. I, glare at my kids, right? So there are going to be changes in how we express ourselves that way, but then
Yeah.
also changes in our tone of voice,
Mhm.
probably too, right? So our voice tone, or maybe even our words, that's going to change. And then at that point in time, usually we have like some awareness that, okay, I am experiencing something, right?
Yeah.
Something's happening. Maybe I can't identify that it's anger, but I know I'm feeling a strong emotion.
Mhm.
That's like the awareness piece, or emotional awareness. And then after that, like even after that emotion maybe has begun to subside a little bit, there are going to be these after effects that
Okay.
are going to make me more vulnerable to experiencing more similar emotions, right? Those unwanted emotions that I'd rather not have. So, what again is neat here is that these distress tolerance skills are skills for changing those secondary ingredients. They're not going to change the emotion altogether because the emotion has already fired, but maybe I can take the edge off of that emotion a little bit to
Yeah.
help me tolerate that emotion so that I don't do something I'm going to later regret, so that I
Yeah.
don't do something that's going to make the situation worse.
So good. Okay. Can we kind of talk about anger as it relates to
Yeah,
that? Because
for
I
sure.
think a lot of times what I see with anger is that women, I think especially, tend to fall on two ends of the spectrum. And it's either like we're really, and this was me for so long, like so good at
Mm,
repressing and suppressing it that we're like,
yeah.
I'm super chill. Like I always used to say that. I'm like, I've never yelled at my kids. I've never yelled at my husband. I'm like, she was not, in fact, super chill. She was just really good at suppressing her emotions.
Yeah.
Or on the other side, we're like, man, it doesn't, I know, like it doesn't take much for me to just snap and
Yep.
start to yell and scream and what have you. So I love this idea of, accepting it and then understanding how we can regulate it. But I think a lot of times when we think about regulating and tolerating, we're like, okay, I'm trying to understand that anger can actually be a really powerful emotion that, if you think
Yeah.
about it, has been probably such a force for good for things that have been
Sure.
unjust or what have you. So I feel that I'm like anger boiling up. What's like a
Mhm.
healthy way that I can actually feel that or express that? Because I think sometimes it's like, but I don't know what to do with this. That's not screaming at someone or that's not like
Right.
scary.
Right. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Such a great question. So I think it really depends on who you're interacting with, right?
Okay.
I think it's okay for our kids to know that we are angry. I truly
Yeah.
do. And
Good.
I don't know that you always like need to tell them that you're
Mm,
angry, for
wow.
instance. And so, whereas you may choose to do so with a partner or a friend, right? And so, I think it depends on with whom you're interacting. In terms of how to feel that anger, I think first, right, accepting, yeah, I'm angry. You could think about, are there any of those primary ingredients that you could change? Maybe how your thoughts are leading you to feel angry when maybe you don't have to be thinking in those ways. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
the thoughts aren't so realistic or helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe you could change those vulnerability factors. But if not, right, like maybe that emotion's there. It makes
Yeah.
sense that you're angry given what's going on. And, there's nothing you can do to care for yourself in order to reduce that anger. But you could use some of these distress tolerance skills to help you feel that anger, maybe bring it down a notch so
Okay.
that you can then use some of the other, like you can, because sometimes what happens with anger, especially for people who are having a hard time not lashing out in moments of anger, it's
Okay.
almost like we've been hijacked by that anger, right?
Mhm.
All that knowledge that we talked about at the beginning, all the tools go out the window, and it's
Yeah.
all you can see is red, and so you just kind of act on that anger. And so doing something that can like help you get your brain back, right, can be really helpful. So one of the things with anger in particular, those physical sensations that we have when we're really angry,
Yeah.
again, oftentimes fuel the urge to fight in some way, right?
Yes.
And so if we can actually target those, for instance, then we can, like, if we can do something that's going to reduce the physical symptoms, we're still feeling the anger, it's still
Yeah.
there, but it might take it down a notch so that we can use, like, layer those with additional skills, follow them up with additional skills. And so that's just one example. Maybe I decide another way would be I can feel really angry and still choose to act lovingly. And I would argue that's not suppressing that anger. It's acknowledging, wow, I am angry. And I value showing up with my kids in a way that's calm, loving, compassionate, respectful, whatever it may be. So that's how I'm going to show up right now, even though I am feeling angry inside. That's a skill called opposite action. And it means really acting entirely opposite to the urges that you're feeling. Again, you can still feel that feeling. No need to try to suppress that. It's just changing the behavior to be different from what you're feeling pulled to do in that moment.
Yeah. Regardless of the emotion, choosing how you're going to behave, right? And speak and act. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So good. This is so helpful. I would love to hear, like, for people who are like, I don't know, whatever it is about our own kids, right? I have a kid who's, really emotional, whatever that means, or I have a kid who tends to get angry really quick or whatever. Like, I would just love to hear maybe how we can talk to our kids about emotions in a healthy way. And then kind of how this framework with accepting and regulating and tolerating, like, what are some ways that we can help teach that to our kids and kind of walk them through it too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is we don't necessarily have to teach any of this to our kids. I think a lot
Like
of it, again,
verbally teach it, right? Like we teach
verbally
it
teach
in
them.
other ways, not
Right.
like, yeah.
Right. If you think about it, modeling is probably the most powerful teaching tool we have. And so whether your kid is really emotional or gets angry easily, probably the most helpful thing you can do there is just allow that feeling to be there, right? Let the feeling be there.
Yes.
And for some, it depends. I think it really depends on the kid. So my daughter, for her, I will just like kind of name what I think I'm seeing. Oh my gosh, wow. Like, yeah, seems like you're really angry.
Yeah.
And she'll often be like, yes, I'm really angry. Like if sometimes she's crying while she's angry, or she's like, yeah, just like she's really angry. My son does not like that at all when I like label the feeling. He's like, you're assuming my feelings, and he doesn't want me to label them in that way. And so I think part of it is like recognizing every kid is different and doing what's going to be most effective, but we don't always even have to label the feeling to allow that feeling to be there, to hold space for it. And just to, that sounds really hard, right? To allow, to acknowledge that, validate that. Yeah. So I think just in doing that, that goes a long way to teaching toward teaching our kids that it is okay to feel however they're feeling, because we're not jumping in saying like, oh, we got to fix this immediately, right? This is a bad thing we've got to avoid. I think too, though, we can also talk about our own feelings, right? Maybe it's even just sharing a moment in the day where you felt really anxious or stressed or upset, something that happened at work or with a friend, sharing about that. And how did you navigate that? And our kids learn so much just from hearing us share those kinds of examples.
Wow, I love that so much. And I think when that's also normalized, at least in my experience with my kids, we've also kind of talked about like, and there's nothing that you have to try to do to make me feel better, right? It's like giving them an opportunity to actually practice compassion of like just sitting with someone and whatever they're going through without starting to develop this pattern of having to fix it or make it better, which I think can be really powerful too.
Oh my gosh, for sure. Yes. And I think that's part of the reason, remember I said, like, we were talking about how you might talk with different people about your emotions. I think the thing with kids, when we share, if we share, I'm feeling really angry right now, it might leave them feeling responsible for those feelings. And so I think it is okay to share with your kid, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, ideally making it clear that that emotion is still your responsibility. It's not theirs. They don't have to do anything to help you not feel that. And that doesn't, even if that means changing their behavior, they don't have to do that. It's still on you to manage that emotion.
Wow, beautiful. I feel like this goes to like such a bigger picture, because I think, this is one of those life skills that I'm like, you're going to learn how to spell. I'm not really worried about that. But like, I want you to be able to sit with people who are going through emotions, or even yourself, and not constantly be looking for something to distract you or make you feel better or over soothe you or what have you. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how, like, the bigger picture, like, as we, first of all, I think, take accountability for, ART with our own feelings, and then working that through with our kids and modeling it for them and teaching them these skills around their emotions, like, big picture, the impact that has for our kids.
Yeah, yeah. There's a saying that every person is a universe, right? Like that, like every person has such an impact on everyone they touch, this whole world of people that they come into contact with. And I think that idea that, yes, when we can allow our kids to feel their feelings in full, and we can manage our own without letting our own feelings hijack those interactions, that is such powerful learning for them. They learn, oh, right, not only can they feel their feelings, but they can also allow other people to feel their feelings. And I think there are so many of, like, the struggles in our world today are kind of rooted in a rejection of other people's thoughts and feelings. And so the more we can help our kids learn to see that they can accept all of those thoughts and feelings, right? Allow those to be there, not have to go in and fix or change everything that they encounter. I think that can be really powerful. And I'm not saying that I don't want kids to be, like, wanting to fix issues in the world, problems in the world, but, like, things that aren't their own, somebody else's thoughts or feelings, we may not be able to change those, nor may we. Sometimes we may want to, but not always. And we really can't do so, right? It's not within our control. And so the more we can help our kids see that, I think the more skillfully they're going to interact with others. And then each of those interactions is going to spill over into other people's interactions, right? So the ripple effects are pretty large, I think.
That's amazing. Okay. The book, you guys, is called Emotion Savvy Parenting, a shame-free guide to navigating emotional storms and deepening connection. And I will link it in the show notes for you guys. But Dr. Jerud, just thanks so much for being here. Thanks for this work. Like, thanks for writing this book. I'm grateful to your husband for planting the seed, and then for you having the courage and taking the time to actually share it. It's really big work. I know it's something, that I think I'll speak for everyone listening and for myself, that, like, this is something we're really aware of. Like, how are we regulating, managing, expressing our own emotions? And then what are we teaching our kids in that same vein? So just thanks for being such a voice in that space that is living it and teaching it. So really appreciate you being here. For everyone listening, that's, like, obviously the book is linked, but where else can they continue to learn from you and connect with you?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on here. It really was so fun getting to talk with you. In terms of where they can find me, my website is alissajerud.com. I'm also on social media somewhat. So they can find me on Instagram at emotionsavvydoc.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And you guys get the book, check her out. This is really big work. It's going to be really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle.